when I got out of the Army, I rode my motorcycle home, and I convinced my father that we needed to go hunting in South Dakota at hunting pheasants. So we finally went out to South Dakota, and we hunted pheasants for 5 days. I think it was, the season was, you could start shooting at 10 o'clock in the morning so we could sleep in, but we were hunting during the day, and the weather was perfect. It was cold at night and cool and warm during the day, so we hunted 5 days. The limits were 10 birds, 8 birds, 4 cocks and 4 hens a day, and the possession limit was 40. So we spent the 5 days hunting pheasants. The corn was about, we were hunting sections, which is 640 acres at a time, and the corn was standing corn, and it was about 6-7 feet tall. And when we shot a bird down, we had to, you might say, go find it, and then my father would have to stand there when I was hunting my birds. I'd have to holler, "Where are you at?" until I found him, and we had a good time. I remember the first bird that got up, it was a dirty cornfield, there were a lot of weeds in it, and a bird got up real close, and I shot it when he was only about 15 yards away, so we just left that one there. It was nothing but wingtips and feathers. So then we went out to, well, we were hunting with a group of people that flown in from Chicago, and the birds, I was blocking at the end of the field, and they ran a pheasant out. It came in low, and as it came over my head about 10-15 feet, I shot its head off, and it was flopping around, and the fellow said, "Why don't you kill that bird?" I said, "How do you do that?" He said, "You wring its neck." So I took the bird out and said, "Here, you wring it," and I cut the head off at about where the white ring was. That was about the last good year they had for pheasant hunting out there. They had a bad snowstorm, and the depth of the snow was so deep that they couldn't eat, so a lot of pheasants died that winter. So we came back with 80 birds, 40 for my dad and 40 for myself, and so as we were coming back to Illinois, there was that morning, it was about a 6-inch snowstorm, and we had trouble getting up in a hill on the Illinois side because it was a steep grade, and some of the fellows had stopped ahead of us and slid off into the ditch when they tried to start again. So we did that ourselves twice, and I pushed the car out, and the third time we made it. And we ran into a blizzard in about a half an hour, and we stayed in that blizzard for about 3 hours. And it was blowing about 35 or 40 miles an hour. The snow was drifting about, something like 2 or 3, 4 feet in front of the headlights, and you couldn't see anything with the headlights. And the only way my dad was driving us, I believe he was just putting between the fence post and the telephone poles to keep it in the road. And we finally ran out of the snow and wind, and we were coming along, and there was a fellow with a flashlight that was waving us down. And we asked him what was wrong, and he said, just over the hill, and there was a low area in there that they had a couple of trucks jackknifing the road, and they had to block traffic both ways. He said you'd have to go around it. So as we went up to the edge and looked down, well, you could just see headlights flashing down there where cars had tried to turn around and got stuck in the ditches. So then we went on. We ran out of the snow then after a couple hours, and it was turning to rain and freezing rain. So we came up to one town, and there was a stoplight there. We happened to hit the red light, and there was a bunch of kids there saying, "We'll push you off for $5." And I said, "No way." I got out of the car and they said, "Hey, he's a veteran." So they said, "We'll push you off for nothing." So, and we went home then and we had pheasant for Sunday dinners for quite a few weeks there. So, in the summer of 1946, latter part of it, another friend and I decided to go on a motorcycle trip to somewhere up around Minnesota, or if the weather was good, we were going into Canada. So we had our bikes checked out, and then we went out. We were starting out to go on the east side of Lake Michigan. And we were going along the highway. It bordered the New York Central Railroad tracks. They were about 50 yards away, and there was a passenger train coming up, and as we were coming along, I said, "Let's see how fast he's going." So we accelerated we caught up with him, and he was doing 75 miles an hour. And I was waving at the passengers, and they were waving back and all that. And I looked around, and this friend of mine was going into a speed wobble. And when he, just as he was going down and on the crash bars, he kicked his foot out quick like, and then he got up and rode the crash bars so he hit the soft stuff in it, like the edge of the road. And as we were going, I mean, after I got up to him and found out he had a bad scrape on where he put his foot out, and it went almost down to the bone in that. So we went into the nearest town there and saw the doctor, and he bandaged it up and said he'd have to cut a piece of the boot out to let air in it. So he did that, and after, it took about 15, 20 minutes, so after that we got on the road again, and we were about 5 miles out of town, and there was a curve in the road anyway, and a car had run off, and he straightened out the curve, and he hit a tree, and he was about 30, 40 yards out into the woods. So where he hit the tree, he hit it square on. It was a big oak, about at least that big, and he pushed the motor right underneath the dashboard, and his transmission was up underneath the seat. So he hit it pretty hard, and of course he had his bones coming out of his pants and the knees where he had stopped in a hurry. So we know that he was dead, so we went down the road a ways and came to a first gas station and had them call in the State Highway Patrol and notified them. So we were going fairly slow in there, and we went up that night and stayed somewhere up in East Michigan, northeast Michigan. The next day we went up through the Straits of Mackinac and up into upper northern Michigan anyway. And we drove up that area, and my grandfather had worked up around Marquette, just off of Lake Superior up there when he was younger. So we went up to Marquette and looked around, and then we went up to, Copper Harbor, which is on a long peninsula going up into Lake Superior, and looked around. Then we went up to Duluth, and when we got to Duluth, we ran into another biker, and he showed us around the loading areas where they loaded the iron ore into the ships and around Duluth, and so it was just like having a personal guide to show us. So then we went up to the iron mines up north of Duluth, and we looked around there, and then we went up to Lake Kabetogama. It's right practically on the border with Canada, and we stayed with a couple that were running a summer camp up there, and we went fishing for about 3 or 4 days. We caught a bunch of walleyes, and then we decided to see about going up to Canada because the weather was so good. So we went up to International Falls and then up north to Kenora. And we got to Kenora, it was about lunchtime, so there was policeman on the corner, and I asked him where a good restaurant was, and he said right across the street. So we went over there, and the most expensive thing on this menu was steak, and it was 50 cents. So we had to order that steak, and it was the biggest thing you ever saw, tender. And so when we went over to Winnipeg that afternoon, we got a motel, and we asked them where a good restaurant was, and they told us. So we went over there, and they had their steaks were the top thing on the menu for 60 cents. So we ate a lot of steak. And this friend of mine was worked on the railroad as a switchman. And so in the wintertime, it got pretty cold around Illinois. So we went several places, and he bought some winter clothes, such as heavy-duty winter pants and jackets and stuff like that. And so one day we were riding around Winnipeg, and we got out to the airport, and there was a fellow standing by a biplane, and we got to talking with him, and he said he'd take us up for about 10-15 minutes for $5. So we went up. We were singly. I mean, I went up first, and then another went on. And from the height we were going up, we could see the area quite a ways around there. And Lake Winnipeg was just north of there for a way, so we could see it, and we could see all the countryside around Winnipeg. So then the weather was about 80 degrees every day, beautiful. So when we were getting ready on the third or fourth day, we checked the weather, and it was a front coming down. So we said, well, we better start heading south again. So next morning, while we started out, we were going along about, and I guess you might call them suburbs, and a little pup, a dog about the size of a terrier came running out, and we were running single file, and I was the first one, so I accelerated when I saw him coming out, and evidently my friend didn't see him, and he hit him, and he spilled his bike and went on the ground, and he tore his pants legs up pretty badly, so his brand new wool pants. So we told the people there that we'd had hit their dog, and what had happened to my friend. And so then we went down to Minneapolis, and I had a friend of mine that was in the Army, and he had sold me my motorcycle. So we stopped and visited with him, and then we went home the next day. So we had a good trip. After I got back, I checked with Pullman Standard Car, which I used to work for as a stenographer. They had just about gone broke when I came there, so I quit. And I was doing a few odd jobs while I was waiting for the college to start at. I was trying to get in Illinois Tech, and they said it'd be about a year before I could get in it. So I did a lot of swimming that summer, and I learned to float, and I went in for distance swimming then. So I was swimming about a half a mile across the clay hole and doing it 2 or 3 times. The water was cold, so we had to get out of the water to warm up, and then we'd swim some more. And then later on, I went to Illinois Institute of Technology to study engineering. And they said, unless you're a genius in math, why get out of the engineering? So I wasn't a genius in math, so I got out. And I took an aptitude test and went to, they had it locally, so I took tests all day long, and then they interpreted the next day, and they suggested I might try forestry as a career. So I looked it up, and the New York State College of Forestry at Syracuse was one of the better schools, so I got on my motorcycle and went out to Syracuse and asked about getting entered in college in forestry. And they said they only took out-of-state students that were straight A's. And I said I wasn't a straight A student, so they suggested I go to Paul Smith's, which is a small junior college up around Saranac Lake. And I was up there, I went up there, and they said they would accept me, but it would be 2 or 3 weeks before they would have the paperwork done so if I could come back. So I then rode out to Nova Scotia, and travel in those days in Nova Scotia was a lot of rock graded roads, and it was awful dusty. And I can remember a couple of times that dogs would come out and charge me, and I couldn't ride the bicycle, motorcycle, because of the rocks were swinging around the tail. And so I had a heck of a time for a while, but I finally started avoiding them if I could. So after I came back, I came back through New York, and then went up to Paul Smith's again, which is up near Sarah Lake, and they accepted my application, and so I went to school there the next September. In September, when I went there, it was mid-September, and they were having frost and freeze and all kinds of cold weather already. So they had their first snow in about, or good snow, about October. And then in the first part of October, it hit 80 degrees for about a week and a half there. So everybody went swimming. And I've been swimming about a mile a day during the summer, so I went up to where they were jumping off the pier into the water, and I didn't think anything about it, and I jumped in. And the water was about 32 degrees because I about froze. I was paralyzed. I said, here, I'm going to drown in 5 feet of water. I was floating slowly up, and I finally came to the surface after about a couple of minutes, and I took a couple of deep breaths, and after I got myself acclimated to the water while I swam out to the rafts, and everything was okay. But it was a very pretty country up there. It was hilly, and then, when the leaves changed color, why you could see them on the mountainsides and all that. It was a beautiful country. And then when the snow started, all you had was the white snow, the blue skies, and the green for the pine and spruce trees. And we enjoyed it. We did a lot of skiing and tobogganing and stuff like that as far as winter sports are concerned. And, but one time during the winter, we had a cold snap, and it would hit about 42 below, and nobody had their cars running that morning until about 1 o'clock. So I put my application in for the University of Florida right after that. So the rest of the time I was working there, going to school there. I had a shop course that the professor that I was staying with, he was head of it, and he said I could do anything I wanted after I learned what the machines were for. And so I decided to rebuild 3 total wrecks. And I bought the wrecks and put the bodies together and had it brazed and put together so I could get it painted. And after the school let out in June, I rode it home, and when I got home, I had to have the motor rebuilt. A friend of mine ran a parts shop, so he he took the motor and re-sleeved it for me, and then gave me all the parts, and I put the parts together and finished the engine. It ran smooth, so I was enjoying it. So I drove the car down to Florida, and it ran fine. So after I went to Florida for 3 years, I believe it was, I graduated in forestry, and we also had another fellow and I got another degree in agriculture with a major in soils. The summer camp that we went to at the University of Florida was held at Austin Cary Forest for the university, and we studied different things like cruising timber and identifying trees and all the rest of it. And one day we were cruising. There was a four-man crew, and I was the third man. As we came around a butt of a big cypress tree, a fella grabbed me in the back, on the shoulder, and held me back. And I said, "What's the matter?" And he said, "Look." And there was a tail wiggling like that, and it was a cottonmouth was right behind the tree, the base of the tree there. So we hollered at the two guys that had already gone through to get a stick, and we'd kill it. So we got rid of that one, and the fella he said he was going to skin it, so he tied a thing to his belt. And we got to the next plot. The snake the tongue was coming out of it. He didn't know how to get it off his belt, so he worked on it for a couple of minutes, and he finally got it off, but the snake was pretty well incapacitated. So another fella was in there skinning a rattlesnake one day, and I asked him what happened. He said, well, he was the only guy that had experiences in the woods. So as he was going along, there were four in the cruising party, and the first three went ahead of him, and he was the last man. And he looked down, and he said, "Come here, you boys." And he showed him there was a 6-foot rattlesnake that they'd both, or all three of them, had stepped over and hadn't seen it yet. And so he told them what they were going to eliminate that one too. So, but summer camp was hot and humid, and we had about a 4 or 5 acre pond there that we used to swim in when it was hot and humid, and we had a good time that summer. We graduated from Florida in 1950 with a degree in forestry, and in 51 for a degree in soils, agriculture with a degree in soils. And so when we graduated in June of 51, we said the normal thing to do when you're graduating is to get a job, buy a car, get married, raise 3 kids. When you're 65, you're retired, and then you go out west. We said, well, we're going to turn that around, and we're going to go out west first. So we decided that we would go out west, and we went out to Oklahoma and Kansas, and we worked in the wheat fields there for about, about a month, I guess it was. And it was hot and humid, but it was much better than Florida. So when we got done with the wheat fields, we plowed up the fields, and when we were plowing, this friend of mine we would get kind of, you might say, tired of riding the tractor. So when we cross each other, he would be on one side of a pond and I'd be on the other side. He'd tip his hat and took a real sweeping bow, and so the next time around he was throwing like he was casting for a fish there, and he then after he had reeled it in for a while he was fighting the fish, and he brought it in. Then he said, I said rather, that boy's been out in the heat too long now. So after we got that, we left there. We went to Dodge City, I believe it was, to get our supplies for going camping. I bought a air mattress and a tarp and a sleeping bag, and he bought some supplies too. So we were heading west from there. We came across Garden City, and they had a sign out, and the largest free swimming pool in the United States. So we stopped and we went swimming for a while. And it was a large pool. They had about 6 or 7 diving boards on the end. So we had our diving masks on, and I went underneath the diving board, and it was all like coins underneath there. And I collected about $7, $8 dollars worth of coins, and I gave him my mask and swim fins, and he got another $7 or $8 when he went in under the rest of them. So we had a pretty profitable time there. Then we went out to Rocky Mountain National Park, and we went up to Pikes Peak. Then we went north to Rapid City and saw the Mount Rushmore portraits, and we saw the Badlands. Then we went out to Yellowstone, west of there, and it was about one evening. I usually slept on a picnic table where we parked the car, and my friend slept in the car. And so one morning, about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, I was wakened by a bunch of flashlights going on around there and people hollering and throwing frying pans and all that. And there was a black bear sitting on a garbage pit that was feeding on. So eventually they hit him with some frying pans and he left. So we looked around for 3 or 4 days at Yellowstone, and then we went up north to the Glacier National Park, and then we went up into Canada for the Banff National Park in Canada, and we went up to see Lake Louise, which I'd heard a lot about, but then we came back to the States and we were in Spokane, and we were filling up our gas tanks and the fellow that was attendant there, he said, "What time are you starting out?" And we told him early in the morning. He said, "Well, you better do that to get across the desert." And we looked at each other and said, "What desert are they talking about?" They told us that they had built Grand Coulee to take care of the agriculture there for the, And after we went up from Grand Coulee, we went up to Wenatchee to see about picking apples if they were available. Well, they said we were about 2 or 3 weeks early, so this friend of mine knew a girl that grew up with when his father was in the service. So we went up there, and her husband was superintendent of a Portland cement plant. And when he found out we were looking for a job, he said, "Oh, I'll hire you." The woods were closed at the time, and we wanted to see what the woods looked like. And so it was so dry that they had to close the woods. So we stayed up there and we worked in a Portland cement plant as laborers. The girl's husband was a fisherman, so he took us fishing for salmon for a couple of times, and we each caught one both times we went. So, and after they opened the woods up, we went to see it. It started raining. We went to see Weyerhaeuser. They had a White River region not far from there, so we looked up the foresters, and one forester took us out on a pulpwood logging job up. They had pulpwood up to 18 inches that they harvested, and then they cut the big timber later. And he showed us how they cruised timber, and on a steep slope, he said, you take 3 steps and count 1, and on a medium slope, he said, you take 3 steps and count 2. That's to bring it out at a flat level that Matt would be at. So after we left there, we went to Crater Lake and Lassen Volcano National Park. And we went down to see the coastal redwoods, and then we went down to see Sequoia National Park, and then we went on to San Diego. He knew a girl that he grew up with that lived down in San Diego, and she had married a lieutenant in the Navy, and he was stationed on a destroyer, but he was in port all the time, so we went out every night and had a beer or two, or dancing, or playing bowling or something like that. And after about 3 or 4 weeks of that, we decided it was time to go home, so we headed east, and we went to Grand Canyon, looked around there for a day or two, and then we went down to Carlsbad Caverns, and then we headed back to Illinois, and back to South Carolina, and I went back up to Illinois then. The trip, we were gone on 6 months, and we went 13,000 miles on my rebuilt Ford, and we averaged about 20 miles to the gallon. We coasted down any long hill we came to, so we saved gas that way, but well, we got home, we decided that we'd better go to work. So in January of '52, we went to work for an international paper company. And we started out as compassmen, and then I became a timber marker down in Florida. And this was at Panama City, by the way. We advanced. After the timber marker, I became a check cruiser. And then I went up to Bainbridge, Georgia, where the company had set up the Southlands Experiment Forest. I became a research forester up there for 6 years. And we were studying one of the problems that we had with, say, direct seeding, burning, fertilization, and things like that we worked on. After I worked there for a while, I got transferred up to up to New Bern, North Carolina. Now, as far as my career was concerned, I was, after the research forester, I became a district forester, and then I was transferred back to Georgetown, and worked as a supervisor of forest inventory, or forest productivity. And I went to, you might say, monitoring the forest practices such as site preparation, planting. Also, the job entailed my keeping up with research, and then when I found something that was interesting, like aerial burning, fertilization, and things like that, I would put an operational trial in for the operation people so they could then see whether they liked the operation or not. If they did, we'd go ahead and become operational at it. And it was really a good experience in that we got to see all the new research that was going on. When I was working in Gainesville, I met Dixie. We were having a party, and it was my birthday, and my roommate at college had invited her and another girl, and I had another date with a girl. So I enjoyed her company, and we went together for a while, and then we got married about a year later. And we had 3 children. We had Scott, who was born in Panama City, and let's say that was May the 4th in 1956. And then we moved up to Southlands at that time, and we had Brian, who was born in September 9th of 1959, and then Lisa was born there in 1962, and those were our 3 children. Dixie liked to camp out with the children, so she would go up to Huntington for a week or 2, and they would camp out in tents for that. And then later on, we took a trip to Nova Scotia. We stopped off in Chicago to visit a sister, and we went up to visit a cousin up in Marinette, Wisconsin, and then we went up to the Sault Ste. Marie, down the Canadian side of Lake Huron. We came back to the States, and I went back to see how Paul Smith was getting along. That was 20-some years later, so they had made many improvements there. It was quite a difference, but there was a big tree that was known as the, you might say, identifying feature of Paul Smith's was a leaning pine. It was a white pine about 3 feet in diameter and about 130, 40 feet high. It was leaning over the road. And they had some students from another college had come in there and cut it down one night. So that changed the appearance of Paul Smith. And later on, we went up to Montreal and camped there for a few days. We went up to Quebec and camped there for a few days. Then we went up along the St. Lawrence to, I think it was Rivière-du-Loup, then we cut down to Moncton, and then we saw the Bay of Fundy, which had 27 or 8 feet tides in it. It was amazing to see a team of horses out there about 2 miles in a mud flat working, and then they all of a sudden start turning around, coming back in when the tide changed. We went up to Sydney, Nova Scotia, stayed there a couple of days. That's where they have the coal mines that run out under the ocean out there for about a half a mile or so. And after that, we came back down on 95 back to Georgetown, and it was quite a trip. We were gone about 3 weeks or so. After working for 32 years with International Paper Company, I retired in Georgetown, and we decided to do some genealogy work. The family names were, say, my father's name was Maxwell, and my mother's name was Suring, and we had my mother's name was Salzman. So we had 2 Germans and 1 Scotch-Irishman in there. We did some genealogy work, and we found out that the Maxwells had come into Portland, Maine, somewhere in the late 1700s, and the Germans had just gone over from about 1870, just before the Franco-Prussian War, so they escaped that. And the Salzmans were the farmers, and they settled about 30 miles south of Chicago. And my grandfather Maxwell helped open up the area, and he had 5 what they call patents for land. I think it was 160 acres each, and some rich financier gave him a 160-acre patent for finding him a section of land south of Chicago with the section that 640 acres had to be on a railroad. So that fitted the area right around Beecher, Illinois, and he moved out there then. They raised Hereford cattle, and he had a bunch of them sent over from I believe, England. And when we were looking at the Historical Society at the local one, we found out that the girl that was working there, her grandfather had brought the Herefords over from England. And we were reading the book of Mitchell had Centennial. We found out that they had sent somebody east to pick up a bunch of Herefords, and we believe that was the Herefords that this fellow had brought in from England. So it all connected in a strange way. We also found out a lot of the cousins and nephews and stuff like that we hadn't known about before. It was real interesting doing the work. And also after I retired, I did a lot of hunting, fishing, and I did a lot of maintenance work around the house and on the lawn, and raised a garden and all the rest of it, so I kept busy. But I shot a lot of doves during that period of time, and I believe I shot about something like 6,000 doves during my hunting career, that and beforehand. And I shot a bunch of ducks. I think I had about 650 ducks that I shot at various places, mainly in Georgia and North Carolina. And I shot some geese in Florida and North Carolina and Virginia. And I think I shot about 15, 18 birds, something like that. I shot some turkeys down at Southland's Experiment Forest when we were down there. I think I had 12 or 14 of those. And I shot 7 deer, mainly in Georgia. The biggest one I shot was an 8-point buck weighed about 165 pounds, and I mounted the head of that one. And the biggest fish I caught was a 9-pound bass that I caught up in North Carolina. And so I shot some quail when I was at Southlands, but I don't remember about how many I shot there, but it was quite a few. We lived in Georgetown for 40-some years. We belonged to the local church there, Urban Memorial Church, and we had became, you might say, familiar with the people in Georgetown. And later on, Dixie had breast cancer about 14 years ago. Then they said she was cured, but about 6 years ago, it had moved to her bones and started in the neck and then worked down. And she finally died from bone cancer. I went to live at Morningside Assisted Living, and I've been living there since. So that's the story.